Do you think that estate planning is important? A priority? I think we can all agree it's necessary, but the follow-through isn't there. According to a survey by Caring.com, in the last 3 years alone, the number of Americans preparing wills has dropped from almost half to about a third. The drop is even greater for older adults, which seems counterintuitive as that's when you'd expect to need it more. Maybe we know these things are important, but we're missing why. And I know death is not a subject people want to talk about either, but it's an inevitability of life that leaves us with much to process. It's better to lean in now than to wait, which only adds to your burden. I know this topic is not only tough, but can also be rather dry. Thankfully, my guest today brings a sense of humor and a professional organizer's focus to the task, and we offer you a conversation that encourages you to plan for the future in a way that will benefit you so much financially and emotionally. You're listening to the Positively Living podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Zawrotny, founder of Positively Productive Systems and a coach certified in time and stress management, helping clients make space for what matters most in their lives. Join me each episode and we'll talk about decluttering, stress management, habits, personalized productivity, gratitude, and so much more. I understand the overwhelm of life because I'm a wife, mom to kids and cats, and a former caregiver. I'm here to help you choose what's right for you so you can do less, live more, and breathe easier. Sound good? Let's get to it. You've probably heard the phrase, hope for the best, prepare for the worst. Today's episode of the Positively Living podcast covers that in a big way and focuses on another tender topic, another deep topic, another awkward topic. But if you've listened to the podcast before, you know I do awkward well, or at least I'm good with it. And my delightful guest, Eileen Moynahan, is too. She knows how to navigate the conversation of death in the best way, with determination, humor, and compassion. Eileen Moynahan enjoyed a long career with the federal government as an intelligence analyst working international criminal investigations before relinquishing her biweekly paycheck to open Legacy Estate Organizing LLC in 2016. An estate administration business, Legacy Estate Organizing partners with the executor and the estate attorney to administer your loved one's estate. Eileen loves to educate people about the need for quality estate planning before death and compassionate estate administration after death. Eileen grew up in New Jersey and has lived in Washington, D.C., France, Panama, Canada, and currently upstate New York. She is the author of After the Funeral, a practical memoir for administering your loved one's estate. She and I met because we're both in the organizing industry, and we both decided to attend an annual conference of the National Association of Productivity and Organizing Professionals. We instantly bonded over how we were both organizers who were a little different, non-traditional, I suppose, and we realized that it was significant personal loss that had led us there. We both turned grief into giving, and we both understood why. I've kept in touch with her for years, and I'm truly honored that she agreed to join me today to talk about what she does and to help us figure out what we can do to prepare for death in a way that makes the most of life. Estate planning and the effects of it go way beyond paperwork, and that's what we discuss today. We cover the benefits of being organized, which applies to all aspects of life, and how that allows us to be fully present, to grieve, and to love. We discuss how having those awkward conversations can make a huge difference in preparing for the future. And we both share significant stories from our own lives that offer examples of how planning changes your experience. You may hear a shake in my voice as I share a loss I experienced shortly before our recording. It wasn't easy to find the right words, but I think that illustrates the point of how complicated a time it is after a loved one passes, and how important it is for us to be as organized as possible before. Eileen and I cover a variety of ways to start estate planning, including finding an estate attorney, signing documents such as healthcare proxies, or even exploring options like a burial trust. But the simplest first step is a conversation. I didn't say easy, but it is an effective first step. We have an opportunity now to find out preferences and figure out ways to honor legacies. That's a huge part in healing and a gift you give yourself and your family. Whichever step you take, don't let perfectionism bog you down. Small shifts can make a big difference. As you can imagine, grief and trauma play a big part in this discussion. I recommend listening to episode 14, How We Grow Through Grief, and episode 29, Trauma-Informed Life, as a companion to this conversation. You may also want to listen to episode 7, The Impact of Stress and How to Manage It for Good. If you are ready to do some estate planning, whether for yourself or to help your loved ones, but you're feeling uncertain, I recommend contacting Eileen directly. She offers consulting sessions and can provide you with many resources. It's a great way to figure out what you will need and decide what to start with that makes sense for you. I also recommend her book, After the Funeral, a practical memoir for administering your loved one's estate. It's a quick and entertaining read. I know that sounds strange, but trust me when I say this. And it gives you details about what she experienced and guidelines on what you need to consider. Now let's join Eileen for our conversation. Welcome, Eileen Moynahan, to the Positively Living podcast. Eileen, I have the National Association of Productivity and Organizing Professionals to thank for our connection. We met at their annual conference and bonded over quite a few things, not the least of which is organizing, but also we share a similar sense of humor and, most importantly, a special understanding of how deep personal loss can lead you to help others. And I just believe that what you do is so important. And I'm so grateful we get to share your wisdom and your humor with the listeners today. So welcome.
Thank you, Lisa. And I feel the same.
So would you start by telling us a bit about who you are, who you help, and what makes you light up?
Well, as you said, my name is Eileen Moynahan, and I have a small business called Legacy Estate Organizing, in which I work with executors and their estate attorneys, if they have one, to address the flotsam and jetsam and whatever we call that stuff that comes with an estate, mostly focusing on documents and assets, less so the physical belongings of a house. So that's where I differentiate myself a bit from other professional organizers. I'm really about the legacy and the assets rather than the belongings. And so my goal is to help people administer an estate more quickly, but more compassionately, and using it as a jumping off point for really honoring your loved one.
And I love that that's what it's about, because we can get mired down in the administrative aspects of it. And you bring so much compassion to this. And I think, too, this happens so much with any kind of organizing assistance. When someone can come in and help you wade through it all, it opens you up to be able to be in the moment, be present, go through the emotions, do what you need to do, as opposed to having to, focus on those details quite as much, right?
Exactly. I'm supposed to make the process easier and more effective, but also allow you to feel those feels while you're doing the work.
Right. Eileen, one of the things that I mentioned was that you and I have both been through great losses, and it's a big part of what led us to do what we do. And I know that your story is in a book that you've written. It's informative and a memoir at the same time, After the Funeral, right?
That is exactly it. Yes.
But I'd love if you would share a little bit about, your story and what led you to do this in your own words here.
Absolutely. And I always say many small entrepreneurs started because of a personal experience, and that is very much the case with me. Just long story short, my parents were killed in a car accident in 2012. And as all car accidents, it's not expected, nor do you expect your parents to die in a simultaneous death en route to your uncle's funeral. So you can imagine the trauma, the logistical details, the suddenness, the lack of closure. So all those things were represented in my experience. The positive side of my experience is that I had wonderful parents and they had addressed some issues years in advance, not knowing that they were going to die that day. What was a very difficult situation, and I empathize tremendously with anyone who has ever had a military or law enforcement officer come to their door to tell them that someone they love is dead. But in a way, it's compassionate because it is not drawn out and you know immediately that your life has changed forever. And so my decision, not at that time, but over the ensuing weeks and months, was to turn all of the good that my parents gave us during their lives into a way of helping others. It's never a straight line, as you as you might expect. There are always some twists and turns and sometimes delays. But the end result is that my experience has led me to help other people who are going through the same thing.
Yeah. And what a beautiful legacy for them. If it had to happen, you're taking something from it and you're giving to the world. And this topic has come up so many times on the podcast, this idea of the wounded healer, that you've had to go through something and there is trauma and grief and so much that you're processing, but that you can see the positives and that you can, also assess it from that organizational standpoint, which I'm assuming you had already in spades. Did you tend to be organized to begin with? Yes.
Yeah, I was a born organizer. And the fact that I ended up becoming a professional organizer later in life surprised no one. I remember my sister-in-law saying, she goes, well, that makes sense. Because clearly that was an indication. So I'm a natural organizer and I'm also very analytical.
Right.
So it's funny how life works out and how all the points connect.
Right.
And lead you to a place that perhaps you were intended to be.
And it was a fit. And with that sort of investigative mind of yours, you were able to figure out well, this works and this doesn't. And now I can take this information and help others.
Absolutely. And people always laugh when they find out what my prior career was. So I was in federal law enforcement. I was an intelligence analyst working international criminal investigations. And I worked in 2 different US embassies around the world. And I worked a lot of money laundering cases. So people are like, well, that makes no sense, but it does, because it involves finding money, digging, staying organized, tracking what you find, following up on leads. But now you're doing it to help settle the estate of a loved one, as opposed to finding criminal charges. So it actually makes sense in a different light.
Yes. In the job searching world, we call these transferable skills.
Transferable skills. Yes. And in this case, it really worked. And I think that's why my parents selected me to be their executrix in the first place. My brother and sister are equally intelligent. They are capable of it. They don't have the inclination or the interest. So I think my parents chose me as the middle child because, you know what? She's an organizational nerd. She likes numbers. She's very dutiful. Let's choose her. And my siblings were like, right on, right on.
Nobody argued the point. That was good. There does sound like again, it's one of those, if this had to happen, there were many points of it that worked, not the least of which is the fact that you can take all of these skills, all of these experiences, and put them together to make what is potentially such a difficult and complicated situation so much easier for other people. So let's, it's almost backing up a little bit as we lead this conversation through to the point of what we can do today to make a difference. We will get there, but I want to back up a little bit because it's something you and I have talked about before, and I want to make sure that we highlight it, is this idea of how organizing can help us in our life, let alone after we pass and for our loved ones after we pass.
For this, I'll refer to a million books written by other professional organizers and so many studies with scientists and sociologists. Disorganization adds stress to our lives.
Yep.
And there's no two ways about it. And you don't have to be immaculate and perfect, but having your ducks in a row does lend itself to a more productive life, usually a less stressful life, and time to focus on what matters to you. And so, even if it's not your natural inclination, a little bit of organization goes a long way in this life and the next.
Absolutely. And when you're talking about stress reduction, it's not that we can avoid stress. That's not going to be the thing. We can't avoid pain, but what we do build is resilience. It's not just the bouncing back that resilience offers, but it's the navigating more smoothly. When you have to go around the hurdles and you need to find something, you need to do something, you need to access something. And then that's the whole point, at least to me, in terms of being organized, is being able to access what you need when you need it.
Absolutely. And then it gives you time to focus on what matters. And I work in the death space. That is that is my area.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a topic that people don't like to delve into.
Yeah.
They tend to lean away from it, whereas I follow the lean in. Avoidance doesn't make it better or easier. And as a matter of fact, a little bit of effort now can really smooth a lot of the difficulties. It doesn't have to be so hard. And when I say that, I mean that about financial planning, caregiving for loved ones, preparing to caregive in advance, how you can make your own death easier for those left behind. There are steps you can take that make it easier for everyone. The person who's dead doesn't matter, but everyone left behind, you want to make sure that the burden is as light as possible.
And that really gets us into the why of this, why I wanted to talk about this today. And your point about how we lean away from it. These are the hard topics of life, right? These are the emotional topics. It's challenging, I think, to differentiate, that was easy for me to say, between, sort of the administrative and preparation side of things and the thinking of, someone that you love not being with you. And it's all tied up. And so I know that this can be confusing emotionally, but to your point about how organization de-stresses, think about it this way. Some of this preparation that we do can actually lift weight off of our shoulders, because then we know that more of the work, the administrative work, has been done prior to, and then at a time, at some point in the future, we don't know when that is, when this inevitable thing happens, when someone passes, we know that certain things are already taken care of, that they're things we don't have to figure out. You talk about focusing on what matters. Well, in the moment of grief, in the moment when someone does pass, the thing that matters most is family being together and acknowledging the love that you have and processing the grief of losing that loved one, not, oh my gosh, where are the papers that I need?
And the panic that sets in. I mean, in our
Yes.
example, I found out on a Saturday that my parents had just been killed. My extended family were all in another state getting ready to go to another funeral. And it could have been a disaster because it's a weekend, many things are closed. Well, my parents had already purchased a mausoleum plot. We knew where they were going to go, and they had paid for it because the three of us didn't actually have the funds at that time to pay for it. So
Yeah.
that question was answered. We knew what church it would happen at. We had a choice between two funeral homes. Fortunately, we chose one that really did a fantastic job of taking the burden off of us. When you have an out of state death, someone has to transport the bodies back. They did it for us. We didn't have to focus on that element of it. My parents had already had a number of things in place years before. I laugh because they were, very frugal, my father especially. And it was only later in life that they learned that they had some money that they could actually travel with. So their assumption was that they would probably die in a plane crash on route, to a vacation. So they wrote their wills as if they were going to die simultaneously. And the question is, who does that? Well, in the end, it was a car crash, and thank goodness they did, because there are some administrative factors that go into that decision. But all of these awkward conversations we had in advance, like my mother announcing at Thanksgiving that she had purchased a joint mausoleum slot, There was a moment of pause, but thank God they did that. And so that awkward conversation made everything so much easier on that horrible day. So none of these efforts, none of these conversations is wasted.
Yes, thank you for that. And I have to say that there's a lot of emotion for me built into this conversation today. So I want to share with all of you. Eileen knows this already, but I want to share with all of you something that happened to me recently. And it happened in between Eileen and I planning to have this conversation. I knew that this was important. I've lost loved ones before. I know the process. And in between the time she and I planned to have this conversation, and the day we're recording it, I lost my sister. And I did have the state trooper at the door that she's describing. And I'm trying to figure out what I want to share with you. And you probably can hear it in my voice. Usually you're really flexible about what I have to say, and it comes easily. And today it doesn't. But I feel it's so important to share it with you. And here's why. Because this was a complicated situation, made even more complicated by the lack of organization that Eileen and I are talking about today. And boy, does that make my emotional experience of it more complicated. She didn't want to talk about these things. She leaned away. She avoided, for whatever reason. I think she assumed I would be the one because I am the last living kin. And I think we both understood that's probably what I would be doing, but she didn't make the choices. There was no paperwork. I didn't even know where her birth certificate was. I knew nothing other than where she lived and how to get in touch with her landlord. And I was left with an enormous mess to clean up. I tend to be very careful about the stories that I tell to make sure that they're my stories to tell. So there are some elements of this that I won't share so that I don't disrespect her, but I will tell you this. The part that is my story is what was left for me and the choices that I had to make, and so many choices that I had to make that I don't think were intended to be my choices. All of the things you talk about working with, a funeral home, thank goodness we had an amazing funeral home in my hometown that has helped us so many times before. And I could reach out to them and ask for help, and they were able to give it to me. Thank goodness I had so many dear friends in my hometown that were ready and willing to be by my side and help me. I'm incredibly grateful for the support system that I have. And by the way, that's a tip to take with you today. Rely on your support system, rely on your network, rely on the people that love you, ask them for help. Always, because if I didn't, I would be so much worse off. But this experience for me was, I don't even know how to explain the compound. You can just throw off the words 10 times worse. I don't even know if it was 10 times worse. It could have been 100 times worse. It was significantly worse for me because nothing was organized. It was the opposite of organized, and nothing was chosen. Decisions weren't made. So I will leave you with that I just went through this, and I'm a professional organizer. I had all the skills to go through this, and it was still so hard because she wasn't willing to have this conversation in life. And again, like you said, Eileen, awkward conversation. Awkward. I mean, maybe it's because I'm the queen of awkward, I lean into awkward. But the thing is that when we talk about these things, we get so much from it. And not the least of which is an understanding of what the people that we care about want. I had to
That is
guess. I had to guess what she wanted, right? So, yeah, okay. Having it announced at Thanksgiving. Okay. Good for you and your family. They have the best stories.
But we all heard it. We all heard it. So
You all heard it and you all knew. So this is the why right here, everyone. This is why. And I love in a way that we each have a story that shows why the awkward conversations and making the choices ahead of time really created, okay, some funny Thanksgiving stories. And it created a foundation for you to get the work done and then be able to focus on the family and the love and the grief and all those things, as opposed to the wondering
And the worry.
and the worry.
I speak to so many people in my age group. I'm in my 50s,
Mhm.
and they can't have these conversations with their parents. They try when they see their parents' health declining and nothing is in place and they can't talk about it. And I'm not saying it's easy. I do recommend wine. Perhaps that's why it came up at Thanksgiving, but it only helps. And I say this from two perspectives: the legacy perspective, as in what would you want, how would you want to be remembered, and then also the legal and financial perspective. If you have alternative plans for your assets after you pass, if you're donating them to charity, if you're giving them to one kid and not the other because one kid is highly successful and the other one is not, let them know before death so there's no fighting. Set them up for success after you pass away. My parents were emphatic that everything would be divided three ways, even Steven, no exception. And for any assistance they gave us while they were alive, they always managed to even it out so that there could be no financial resentment. And to this day, there isn't. I mean, my siblings and I, we aren't perfect, but we never fought about money, the estate, the belongings. It actually went like, Hallmark Channel perfect. Part of that is we were in a state of shock. And part of that is we had been given our marching orders 10 years prior, like repeatedly ad nauseum. You will not bicker, you will not fight. And we didn't. And it did make the week and 2 weeks and month afterwards much easier for all of us, despite the manner of their death. So just imagine one of the worst possible death situations could come out in a positive light.
Mm,
So there is so much value in forethought and in sharing and in talking.
right. So let's talk about ways that we can do that. What steps can we walk away with today, especially if we're in a situation, and it's very common, you're in good company. If you're listening to this and you're like, I have no idea. I have no idea what's going on. Let's talk about the awkward conversations. Let's talk about, so not only what can we do in terms of those conversations, but Eileen, what are we looking for? Or, I always love to say the 80-20. Hi, it's an official thing I have to say at least once in an episode if I can. So 80% of your results, 80% of where you want to go with this can be done by 20%. So in other words, it doesn't take that much for you to be in a better place. What is that 80-20, Eileen? What can we do today?
I believe you're referring to the Pareto principle.
That is correct.
We read way too much. So a lot of people think everything has to be perfect. And I'm a recovering perfectionist. My husband would say in regards to housework, perhaps too much recovering, like I've gotten a little too relaxed. But you're not going to have it perfect. You want to go for pretty good. So the most important thing, obviously, is while your parents are alive or your loved ones, do they have anything in place for their care should they become ill? If they have a long-term care policy, if they have some insurance that they intend to help cover their costs while in assisted living, talk about that, because you certainly don't want to put them in a Medicaid facility and then find out, oh, they had provided for that and they actually could be someplace closer with better care. And then, of course, you want to have the death discussion, which always comes from seeing a movie, reading a book, or someone close passing. So while you're talking about something, you just say, hey, mom, dad, what would you like? Would you prefer to be cremated? Would you like to be in a cemetery? Would you like to be in a mausoleum? Are you the scatter at sea kind of people? And then just open it up. Now, it may not work. It has not worked with my in-laws. They are of Spanish descent, and they were like, oh, please, please. But I think as time goes by, we lost my father-in-law this year. My mother-in-law is more amenable to discussing some things. We now know that she would like to be in a coffin and be, put with my father-in-law, who was cremated, because that was we finally got that out of him. Even the littlest bit can lend itself to a lot. So that was a question we didn't have. The legal aspect of it, people go, wah, wah, why are you talking about that? It can be very helpful. And people think it's just the will, but it's not just the will. It's also the healthcare proxy, the decision making for when you can't speak for yourself. You don't want a court to have to decide this. There are wonderful estate attorneys. Most of them will do a package now where they get you all of those documents in one package for a fixed price. You pay it once. You can always revise it later. But once you have that, that will help when they're incapacitated, on a machine, in assisted living, recovering from, or not recovering, I apologize, suffering from dementia.
Mhm.
If they've already gone down the path of dementia, it is often too late to put those legal documents in place. And then you are forced to do a guardianship, which again is court. You want to avoid court. Not that court has its purpose, but if you can avoid taking family matters into a court, it's going to make things a lot easier. And then we talk about how you approach the senior people in your life, but you should also go horizontally to your siblings and just say, I spoke with mom, I spoke with Uncle Joe, and they say they would like this. And so that you're on the same page. It's best if they can all hear it so everyone knows what the story is. It's super best, if that's a word, if it's documented and consistently so. I think a lot of times people delay because they don't want to make the decisions. How do I divide my money? Who do I give the responsibility for making medical decisions? If you don't make the decision, events will make the decision for you. And again, there's no perfection, but you really can make it easier, and people are surprised, much cheaper. A court case inevitably is expensive. If you don't have to go to court, if you can, more of the assets are reserved for the beneficiaries, for the charities, for whoever has been named.
Right.
Again, I encourage the use of an estate attorney, both for planning and after death, but you don't need to, how should I phrase it? It shouldn't end up being a large part of your loved one's estate. Use the estate attorneys for the legal work that they do so well,
Mhm.
but don't leave administrative or emotional, or don't leave those kind of mediation tasks to the attorneys. Let them do what they do best. You resolve your own preferences as a family and hopefully in advance.
Right. And if someone were wanting to take these steps, is this something that you could consult with them to say, okay, so here's an order in which we can do these things? Is that something you could help them with? Or is it more of after the fact that you work with the paperwork and the processes of it?
That's actually a great question. Now, when I started my business, it was solely to work with people after someone passed away, because that was my experience, and that was my specialty, and that was an area where I thought I could most help. But of course, I've gotten a lot of requests. Well, why do you wait until death, Eileen? Why don't you start helping people before death? So I talk about it endlessly. Don't get in an elevator with me. So the main bulk of my business is still helping people find assets and claim assets and then close the estate after death. But I also work on the other end. Just like this conversation we're having, I encourage people to put their own affairs in order and then also to speak with their loved ones, particularly older, but not necessarily. I do offer a product developed by someone else. I'm an authorized reseller called the My Life Packet.
Okay.
And that is a life and legacy planning system which walks you through, it asks you the questions. What would you want in your obituary? What assets do you have? What debts do you have? What do you want to be remembered for? What are your end of life wishes? It literally walks you through step by step so that when and if you do die suddenly or over a long course of time, your executor or executrix will have a guidebook. And those questions will be there in black and white. And it's not a legal document, but it is such a guide.
Right. And, it goes back to what I know with coaching is when we start asking really good questions, we find out what we need to find out. And going back to this, the reason I asked about how we need to prepare for it and how you help. And I do think it's important to talk about it before it happens. So this is something where if you know what we need to see after it happens, it's really helpful to be able to talk to you about it before it happens and what you need to set in place and what you're talking about with like the long-term care and things like that. It's because those aren't just segmented parts of our life. It all blends in. And I can absolutely verify what you're talking about because in caring for my mom who had Alzheimer's, we set documents in place ahead of time, power of attorney. healthcare proxy, right? Things like that made a significant difference while she was living. But it also made a significant difference, of course, along with having a will. That was incredibly important. But that made a significant difference for me to administer everything after she passed as well. The other thing I wanted to bring up, maybe you could speak to a bit, and I found it very helpful with her. Part of that, of course, was from the financial standpoint of wasn't so much hiding her assets, but using her assets in the correct way, especially when you start getting into Medicaid issues and things like that. But a burial trust was recommended by our estate attorney. And I found that so helpful. What do you think about those?
I am not well versed in burial trusts,
Okay.
but they are becoming more popular. And you want to make sure there are provisions to pay for, and people are always shocked, the funeral, the casket,
Yes.
in my case, the transportation of the bodies from one state to another. So to set it up ahead of time is very helpful. You also can fund it with today's dollars as opposed to later dollars. And almost every funeral home, I think every funeral home now, has someone who can give you some information about this. And a lot of people are like, oh, now we're going into, now you want to set up a special mechanism for the paying. Just give it some thought. Give it some thought. And all of this starts the train rolling as to what do you want at death? What do you want? How do you want your assets spent? Where do you want to be?
Right.
I use I always like this story. My mother, when she went to the mausoleum to book, they booked pre-build because you save money. They're very frugal. And so they paid for their slots before they were actually built. And she said, but from the plans, I chose the one that was at eye level when you're sitting on the bench. So when you all come to visit us, you won't have to crane your neck. And you're like, that is, that's silly, right? Oh no. Now we pull the bench over and we are eye level with mom and dad. And I was like, she was right again. So all of these things, they're all collective. It's all a continuum and they're all interrelated. And
Mhm.
so all those awkward conversations make for an easier time now. And I can't reiterate that enough, that it doesn't have to be as hard as we make it nowadays. And I also, my favorite quote, every time I give a presentation or a lecture or anything, I always say, remember these words: nothing is automatic. So if your loved one dies and you do nothing, nothing will happen. No one will come to you. The money will not come to you. No one will give you suggestions on how to handle things. No one will file tax returns for you. No one will aid you in any way. You have to start the ball rolling. You have to reach out and be the instigator. And that is something I can't stress enough. And if you really don't have the time, which a lot of people don't, ask for help. Ask for help. Ask for family members, ask professionals. You can always call me for free, and I can set you on the path for the first few days and weeks. You don't have to sit there alone, paralyzed. Move forward and do the best you can for your loved one. It's your last gift to them.
Oh my goodness. I love that. Well, you just wrapped this up beautifully, Eileen. Thank you. Yes, that's why we're having this conversation today. We've been through it. We get it. You're not alone. We are a resource. Reach out and yeah, start these questions now because I promise you, just like, you know what? It's just like productivity, right? The work that you do ahead of time, like you said before, sets you up for success. And that sounds a little different when we're talking about it in this context, but what it actually sets you up for is much less stress and much more peace. And boy, don't we want that in our world now and in the future.
Absolutely. And gratitude. If you're less worried and less stressed, you can be grateful for everything that your loved one brought to your life. And you absolutely want that.
That's right. Again, making space for what matters. That's where you and I absolutely stay on the same page in understanding that these are the things that we can do to open up what matters. And you're right, being able to be in that moment and to be present and to be grateful and to focus on the connection that you had with the person that you've lost, as opposed to having to focus on the paperwork. I mean, there's still, don't get me wrong, there's still plenty to do, but all of these steps can really help ease that. And it's so worth it. All right. Wonderful. Let's move into another kind of wrap up. Because I know this is such an intense subject that we're talking about, but there is joy in all of this, the joy in knowing the potential of being at peace and of getting things taken care of and knowing what everyone wants. Well, let's have some joy in our wrap up. Would you please fill in the blank for me, Eileen? The song that always makes me dance is?
I'm not sure if I even know the title, but it is by the group Tub Thumping. And it starts, I get knocked down, then I get up again. Done it. And I was like, oh,
Yes.
that's so me. That is so me. And I wish it for everyone else. Don't let life knock you down and you remain there. Stand back up.
There you go. There, the song of resilience that will be on the Spotify playlist, everyone, volume 2. All right. Wonderful. How about now? You did mention one. I don't know if there's another one here. The quote or the mantra I share all the time is?
I have a lot of quotes. So this is actually related to the song. There's a Japanese proverb and it says, fall 7 times, stand up 8. So as you can tell, I'm a klutz. So there must be a lot of falling in my life because there's a theme here.
I always say this to my kids. I always say this to my kids that it's like, it's not how many times you fall down, it's how many times you get back up. Yes, absolutely. Now, how about a resource, book, or app that makes my life easier?
I am a Luddite and I use but don't love technology. I long for a simpler time. So my resource that keeps my life in order as a professional organizer is a paper planner. I know I use the phone, I use whatever, but at a time when, say, we don't have electricity, which happens a lot in our neighborhood,
Mm-hmm.
I can glance at the paper planner. I knew clearly what time I was talking with you today. I know what's happening next. I know what's happening tomorrow. And it doesn't require it to be plugged in, charged, automated, or updated well, we do get a new one every year. So it is a simple way for me to keep all of my tasks in order. Mock me
Wonderful.
if you will, but
I will not mock you, first of all, because I don't do that. Second of all, because it's a podcast, so you can't see it, but Eileen can see me holding
I
up
can
my
see it.
paper planner as well.
I can
By the
see it.
way, which paper planner?
No, I'm very simple. Right now I have a planner pad,
Mm-hmm.
but for the coming year, I've chosen a kind of a velvety carry in the purse one. So I am open to many different planners, and it's like purses. You try to find the perfect one, but they're all good.
They are, and it's not about the planner. That's another conversation for another
Yes,
day.
yes.
But that's awesome. Okay. And speaking of gratitude, we finish off with what or whom are you grateful for today, Eileen?
Oh my goodness. How do you pick one? You know, in honor of this episode, I'm grateful for my parents. And I use this as a discussion starter. They weren't perfect humans, but they were wonderful. None of us is perfect. You can be a gift to those around you without being entirely perfect. And so I'm very thankful for my parents for as long as we had them, for the people they chose to be, for the way they raised us, and for the legacy they left for me, which of course inspired the name of my business. So
I love that. And I'm grateful for them too, because they have led us to this conversation today, for you being here, doing what you do, and helping others. I'm so grateful for you. So tell us a bit more about where we can find you. You know, we of course have your book. You mentioned being a reseller for that packet that can help us prompt things. Tell us where we can find you and what we can find.
you can find me in all my complexity at www.legacyestateorganizing.com. The book is available from that website, but also on Amazon and on Audible. And just in case you get confused, I always like to articulate that my After the Funeral is not the same as Agatha Christie's. Damn her for writing a book with the same title. Mine is After the Funeral, a practical memoir for administering your loved one's estate. So please differentiate. I mean, you'll still get a good mystery, but I'd rather have you buy mine than hers. On my website, you'll also find some helpful videos. I produce a newsletter every month that has tips, and I'm going to be doing more speaking when allowed. so that I can get out there and share this message with, believe it or not, the one or two people who don't listen to your podcast.
That is wonderful. Okay, I will make sure to have all of these links in the show notes as well. Thank you, Eileen.
Thank you.
Oh, I love that you're shining your light in this world, and I'm especially thankful that you shared it with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you, Lee. Thank you for hosting this podcast. I think it's a wonderful gift.
An inheritance is what you leave with people. A legacy is what you leave in them. Craig D. Lounsborough. Thank you for joining me on the Positively Living podcast. Your time is precious, and I'm honored you chose to spend it with me. Would you like to further explore the topics you've heard and implement what inspires you? Could you use some coaching support? What if you could attend a private Q&A with my guests and access bonus content? You can do all that and more in the Positively Living membership community. Check the link in the show notes or head to positivelyproductive.com/membership to enroll. I look forward to having you join me next episode and in the community. Until then, keep it positive and keep making space for what matters most.